Okay, today the sun is shining on us. The sun is an amazing resource that we haven't used enough. So the next speaker will tell us about great opportunities when it comes to solar energy. So welcome, Joakim Byström. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Yes. So I'm Joakim Byström from the company Absolicon. And I'm going to tell you a little about how concentrated solar energy will be able to change the energy supply in several sectors of the society. We work with concentrators like this, that is a parabolic shape that focus the light and produce both heat, electricity, and steam. But I have my background in forestry, actually, because my father invented a small sawmill in 1989. And I've been traveling around in Sweden, in the world, selling this portable sawmill. I usually ask, is there anyone in the audience who have actually used the Logosol sawmill? Not in this audience. We have sold 20,000 sawmills in Sweden. So every 1 in 20 have actually used the sawmill. And part of my mission at the Logosol was to sell sawmills in Russia. So I have sold 2,000 sawmills in Russia. And in this work, I got involved in a lot of environmental work because forestry is done very badly in different parts of the world. And we actually invented a small sawmill that you can carry out in the forest to cut planks and boards there. And we cut the first FSC-marked log in Sweden together with World Wildlife Fund. And I have worked with this kind of invention all my life. Actually, I found an old newspaper from 1985 from an invention shop that we had in Härnösand when I was 15 years old. Part of this was making part of a competition, and it resulted in me getting a prize from the Swedish king. So you can imagine what a good push this was for a young person. And when we developed this new solar collector, we again applied for a competition and were awarded by the king again. And this was, of course, a very good start of Absolicon. And we have got a lot of prizes and attention for our collector. Well, what we work with is the environmental situation. And sometimes it's difficult, if you look outside, to imagine that we are in a climate crisis. In Sweden, we don't see much of those big problems, and when we see them, we take them as just coincidences. But if we look around the world with typhoons and the drought and the forest fire, it's quite big impact. I was in Colorado being trained by Al Gore actually 2 weeks ago. And in Colorado, they have the Colorado pine beetle that have killed huge areas of the pine forest due to the increased temperature in Colorado. And after killing the trees off, there are massive forest fires. So people around the world experience those climate changes. And it's not so strange. We have a small planet. We're a very thin layer of atmosphere. The atmosphere is as thin as the peel of an apple. And if we emit a lot of CO2 emission into the atmosphere, we change the climate of the world. And this needs to change. And we know that in Sweden, but they also know it in China. And in China, they have huge problems with pollution of different kind, killing millions of Chinese every year. If we look at the CO2 emissions of the world, we can see that from the prehistoric level of 280 parts per million, we are now up at 400 parts per million. So quite a steady increase as we take up oil from the ground, burn it, emit the CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, what will this do to the climate? One thing to know about the future is, of course, to look at the past. And what one can do is to drill down in the ice of Antarctic, where the ice have not melted for 1 million years. So the ice has actually been compacted, and when you bring up those ice, you can see the dark and the light bands. The dark is summer and the lighter is winter. And you can take out from ice kilometers down a small air bubble. And in the air bubble, you can measure the CO2 content. And you can tell at 739,349 years ago, it was this concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. This is one way you can also check the rings of trees and how the sediments of the sea. What you come up with is a curve like this, where you can see that the CO2 emission the CO2 level in the atmosphere actually changed a lot the past 800,000 years. Sometimes it's down at 200, sometimes it's up at 300. But it has never been above 300 parts per million. What you also can see is that when it's down at 200, it's a different temperature on the Earth. And this is what we call the ice time, ice age. So 20,000 years ago, the CO2 was 200 parts per million, and we had 2 kilometers of ice above Sundsvall. Today, we have 300 parts per million, and it's instead a quite nice Mars day. When Al Gore showed this diagram for the first time, he had 380 parts per million in the atmosphere. When I show it to you today, we have 400 parts per million. If we continue to emit CO2 emissions the way we do today, Al Gore, he had a ladder, so he could climb up to try to reach the uppermost point where we will be in 2050. And that is not so far away. That's when my son will be my age. Then we will have 680 parts per million. And if this swing is the difference between an ice age and a nice Mars day, what kind of climate is this? And this, the politicians and the scientists have known for decades that we cannot accept this kind of development. This will spoil the climate that we have today on Earth. But they have been unable to take the political decisions to change this because it's global politics that is very difficult. And today, we have increased the average temperature of the Earth with 1 degree. And this is creating much stronger storms, much heavier droughts, and making some places of the Earth impossible to live at. And those refugees that we have today from Syria, for example, can, with a good argument, be said to be climate refugees, because the drought in Syria forced 1.5 million people from the countryside into Aleppo and Damascus and the problems that created. And this is only the beginning of this problem. Fortunately, the world leaders managed to take, they grabbed themselves together and were able to decide in Mars in December 2015 to anonymous adopt to keep the temperature of the Earth increased below 2 degrees centigrade. And they even added efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees. And this was because some countries refused to sign something that said 2 degrees. And that was those countries that will not exist anymore if we have 2 degrees increase, like Maldives, Solomon Islands. They will simply be gone. So they couldn't sign their own death sentence. However, it will be impossible to keep it at 1.5. We will have difficulties in 2. So they will, if you want to experience the Solomon Islands, it's time to go now. This was a big success, and it was signed by 197 countries of the world. Sometimes people ask, but is it really sure? Are the climate change real? I heard someone saying that it was very cold last month. And one proof of that can be that the climate research that laid the ground for this agreement, it was mainly made in the 90s by the US and by Germany. In US, George W. Bush, he spent $1 billion every year on climate research. But the other countries didn't really believe this, like Saudi Arabia, Australia, China. They appointed their own climate scientists and appointed money for their own research. So when they met in Paris, every single country had their own scientific advisor that had done their own research. And the conclusion was that 197 countries signed the agreement. So the countries and the scientists all agree we need to keep this below 2 degrees. It's a big challenge because we have already burned half of the amount that we can burn to keep it below 2 degrees. And we still have 5 billion people on Earth that is living on bad conditions. And they want to live as us. They want to have the same energy consumption. But we have already used half of the space. So we need to find a method to share the CO2 emissions that we still can do and keep it below 2 degrees. The problem is that we have found this much oil, coal, and gas. And not only found, this is put into the balance sheets of countries and companies. I always thought that oil sheikhs who had a lot of money, they were rich because they had sold oil and earned money. No, no, no. They have taken loans on the oil they have in the ground. There is where they got their money. So this is already sold. So when we say to Saudi Arabia, oh, you can't take this oil up, it needs to stay in the ground. They say, no problem, we can leave it in the ground. But of course you need still to pay for it, because it have already been sold. And this is of course a big challenge, how to keep this in the ground. And this have also created what you call a coal bubble. So in the real economy, where you put your pension money, there is 2,500 billion Swedish crowns in assets that is fossil fuel. And if we're going to stay below 2 degrees, we can only burn for 80. So there are some losses here to come. Sell if you have any carbon assets. I can jump this one. But this is not only a CO2 problem. We actually live above the capacity of the Earth in many aspects. I myself ran this calculation from the WWF, and as you see, it will require 3.39 planets if everyone would live like me. And then I'm still a vegetarian who live in a house with 100% renewable heat and electricity. And still I need 3.4 planets. The only solution to this problem is actually solar energy. As you can see, this is the energy supply of the world today. Almost everything is oil, coal, and gas. And we don't really think that way in Sweden. We think that people have stopped using oil because we don't see it here. But in reality, the world is run on oil. And solar and wind is such a small part so you can almost not see it. And if we're going to stop increasing the use of fossil fuel and get it down, we need to massively increase wind and solar power. But there isn't enough wind power. If we take Sweden, we have fantastic conditions. We have big forests that we can burn. We have a lot of wind power. We have water power. We have solar power. But if you come to India, for example, they have no big forests that they can burn, and it doesn't blow that much in India. The resource that is abundant in the world is the solar energy. So if you ask any think tank, they come up with this kind of schedule where 60-70% of the energy supply need to come from the sun. That is why we have created the Absolicon collector. And it's it's actually a little funny story. When I was 12 years old, I was very interested in mathematics. And I did y equal x square on paper in maths. And I asked my father, what can this geometrical shape be used for? And he told me, well, you can build a solar concentrator. So I took this shape to the carpenter teacher, and he cut it with a bandsaw, and I put aluminum foil inside. And when I then put the hand, I burnt myself because the sun became so strong. So this idea I've had all the time since I was 12 years old. Then we started this invention work, and I became chairman of Young Scientists in Sweden. And as such, I was asked by the government to become youth representative to the Commission of Sustainable Development. So I went to New York with the Minister of Environment, Olof Johansson, for 3 weeks. I had my own office at the 42nd level in the skyscraper. And in one occasion here, there was a text about environment education. I proposed that all groups in society should be involved in planning environmental negotiation. And then Olof Johansson proposed, well, then you can say that then you can propose that in the UN. So I came to sit in the Swedish chair, and you lift the sign saying Sweden like this. And then after a while, the delegate of Sweden. And hey, I propose here in paragraph 42 that we add "and other major groups." And how it was, this ended up in the final document from the conference. Then I went home to Sweden, and at a 30-year celebration, we sat after eating the cake. I told this story, and we said, what is this? We want to change the climate of the world. And what was it? 3 weeks in New York, and other major groups in this document. No one will ever care. Why don't we build something? And we're really good at building things, you know. we're this group of technic people in Härnösand. We have started several companies. So on the napkins after the cake, we started drawing the drawings on those collectors that I built when I was 12 years old. And we brought together different knowledge that we had. And the conclusion was that this is the cheapest way to do energy, all categories where there is a lot of sun. Why haven't anyone built this before? And we put together a prototype. It worked perfectly. I went to the big university library in Uppsala and found that all the parts were already researched, but no one had put together a working system. So then we started Absolicon. And all from the beginning, we had this focus to produce both heat and electricity. Because it's often such a big focus on electricity. Sometimes I think that people think that energy and electricity is the same. But electricity is actually only 20% of the global energy mix. Remember that, 20%. So when you hear about wind power, wave power, solar cells, it's just this tiny bit that it can solve. Half of the energy in the world is consumed to heat stuff. Basically, if you want to have some cloth, you have a big pond of hot water and you burn oil below to get hot water to dye your clothes in. And that is the same in all the processes. So half is heat. And this heat, it comes from coal, oil and gas in almost 100%. Even in Sweden. If there's a small industry in Sweden, you can bet they still burn oil to heat their chemical process. Or natural gas. So we made a product that can produce both heat and electricity. This is an installation in south of Sweden. It's a small group of industries that have built a district heating network. They have a biofuel burner and they have solar. And thanks to the solar, they can turn off the biofuel burner from March to September. So 6 months they run on solar. We are not totally alone. There are some other companies in this business. And we all have one big problem, and that is that we are situated in small basements. We are still like inventor companies doing those collectors one by one. This is our installation in the district heating network in Härnösand. One solar collector like this is 10 square meters, and we can build 2 every day. So we won't change the world by building 2 solar collectors every day. But they are very efficient. And we have, thanks to the uniqueness of the collectors, we have been able to sell thousands. But about 3 years ago, we was exhausted from building small installations. We have built installations like this in Chile, Argentina, Spain, Italy, Greece, India, Germany, and Sweden. And it's a lot of work. And we concluded that we will not get where we want to if we are going to build 2 collectors every day and then install them around the world. We need a factory. Because also the cost of the collectors are too big. We need to cut the cost. And we could see that the price of the solar collectors, they were about here, and we wanted them to get down here. That was the main challenge of Absolicon. And we made a sketch of a factory that would produce, instead of 2 collectors a day, they will make 1 collector every 6 minutes. And with this idea, we went to the stock market. And we asked people in Härnösand to buy shares in our company. And first we raised 0.4 million euro, and then we raised 1.5 million euro in the planning process to mass produce our solar collectors. And if we can do the solar collectors in this factory, and we can install them at 2,000 Swedish crowns per square meter, we will have a payback time between 3 and 5 years in industry. And that is a fraction of what other renewable energy sources can give. Think if you could invest and you have 20% return of your investment every year. It's actually energy at at 2 euro cents per kilowatt hour. So we made a plan and we brought in this money. And in September 2015, we moved out of this basement and moved into real industrial facilities in Härnösand. We have 2,000 square meters here where we're going to make the factory. And we also were noted on the Swedish stock exchange. We had the entry value was about 4 euro, and today we are about 30 euro. So the people in Härnösand who invested their hard-earned money in Absolicon actually got 10 times their money. So they invested about 3,000–4,000 euro, and now they have 30,000 euro. And it has been a very successful. We are actually the stock on this stock exchange that have increased most of all stocks the last 12 months. We have 3 markets that we want to address. One is the industrial market, because all those industries today burning oil, they need to change to solar and renewables. And the International Energy Agency, they say that this market up to 2050 is 300 billion euros. Solar thermal to industries. So that was our first market. There are a lot of processes that we can run, like boiling, drying, cooling, sterilization, bleaching, washing, because everything we have is using heat to be produced. If you eat a tomato, you can bet someone have burnt oil to heat the water that the tomato is washed with. If you buy a car, oil have been burnt to dry the paint of the car. In the all processes, oil has been used. So we think that the industries of the future, where the CO2 emissions actually need to be 0, that will be powered by solar collectors on the industrial rooftops. This is an example of GB Skolan in Sollefteå, where we placed our solar parabolic troughs on the rooftop, and it powered then the school with heat. In summertime, when the school is closed, the heat is put out to the district heating network, and autumn and spring it's used in the school. The other interesting sector is solar cooling, because as you know, in sunny countries, a lot of the energy is used to cool buildings and food and chemicals. And we can actually use the heat from the solar collectors to cool stuff. There are a lot of heat-powered cooling processes. And today often they run those coolers by natural gas. So they burn natural gas to get cold storage, for example. And we can replace this natural gas with our collectors. This is an installation that we have done on the hospital of Härnösand. It produces heating, cooling, and electricity simultaneously. It's the only installation in the world that can make all those 3 things that all buildings in the world needs. It's a part of an EU project that we ran 5 years ago. This is another solar cooling installation that we have done. This is in a hospital in Spain. They have a big bio-powered boiler, and they have our solar collectors. Together, they have 100% renewable cooling of the hospital. The third sector that we are looking into, and this is quite new for us, that is district heating. Because in Denmark, they have discovered that district heating can actually replace natural gas. Solar can replace gas in district heating. So those small communities in Denmark that today are using natural gas, they are building this kind of fields and a big storage tank to reduce the gas consumption. And the orange dots here are existing plants, and the blue are new ones. And you can see the total volume is 1.2 million square meters that has been installed. And that's quite a substantial amount of solar collectors. When you choose solar collectors to this kind of field, you check the data. Like when you buy a car, what is the emission, how fast can it go? So therefore we tested our solar collector in competition with other solar collectors at Statens Provningsanstalt i Borås. And when those figures came back, we had a big party at Absolicon, because this is fantastic data. It actually shows that our collector in district heating applications are 50% better than our competitors. Yes. And this is really revolutionary. You can actually, when you have this field, you know, you only need to build the 2/3, and you can save all the piping, you can save the heat exchange, you save everything here. So and those plants are today nearly not profitable. But if you can do it with 50% higher, then it will be great. So this is a new market for us with the district heating. And this is also something which we have met a lot of interest from China. And the whole year of 2016, we have got many, many invitations from China. And we didn't really understand why. And this was especially a mayor from the Sichuan province who was very eager to cooperate with us. But in December 16th, 2016, we understood why. Because then they published the solar energy part of the 5-year plan. And it said that district heating, demonstration project 3 million. Denmark have in 30 years been able to install 1.2 million. This is 3 million square meters. And we have a collector that is 50% better than the best. So that was very good. The other thing was industrial applications. Are you with me? 20 million square meters. Today, industry is not using solar. It's like a black point. They don't know that solar can be used. And suddenly, the Chinese government, with a strike of their pen, have said, you must install 20 million square meters in 4 years. 1 week after this, we signed the sales agreement of a complete production line for our solar collectors in China. Yes, so that's a big step forward. It will produce 100 square meters of solar collectors. We charge them 20 million Swedish crowns, and we will build this now in autumn in the Sichuan province. But as you see, this is great, of course, but it only produces 100,000. They need 20 millions. So this is what Absolicon will do. We will not sell solar collectors as our first business. We will sell those production lines. And there are hundreds of production lines needed around the world to be able to move the industry from using oil and gas to using solar collectors. And in the same way as Denmark started the wind power revolution and Germany started the PV solar cell revolution, China has now started the industrial solar revolution. And the demands are actually zero CO2. That when Volvo now is building 4 factories in China, all those 4 have 0 net emissions of CO2. So China is putting a very strong demand on their industries to cut out oil and gas. So, and this is also in Sweden. Isabella Lövin, our climate minister, who actually visited Absolicon yesterday, she has proposed a law that is being supported by all the 7 old parties to have 0 as net emissions in Sweden 2045. And I think here something starts to move in people's mind, because as long as we talk about reducing CO2, they think, well, I can drive a little less. I can eat a little less of this. But if you talk about 0, you really need to reconfigure your factory. If you have a textile factory, you need to think, how can this have 0 in CO2 emissions? And then you will end up with parabolic concentrators on your rooftop, I can tell you. But this with the district heating is also, of course, for Sweden. Today we are very proud of our district heating network because we burn not fossil fuel, but mainly renewable fuel. But we can actually also here replace the fuel with solar. This is a map over Härnösand, and if we want to cover the total heat need a warm summer day in Sweden, we would need 10,000 square meters of solar collectors. And that actually fits on the rooftop of our factory up here. So the rooftop of one larger building in Härnösand is enough to cover all the heat need of the city. If we want to store this energy so that we can use it also some in the winter time, we would need 50,000 square meters. So up here at the small local airport, we would put up a few fields with solar collectors, and they would then be able to store energy in a big pit from summer to winter. We would heat up the water to 95 degrees and use heat pumps to extract the last piece of heat for the city. So this we now are proposing for the energy agency in Sweden and for, of course, the local politicians. And if you compare what the district heating need compared to biofuel, this is the solar installation, and this is the corresponding amount of wood that you need to run the district heating network. So, conclusion. We are a team here in Härnösand that has worked with solar concentrator for 15 years. We have a product that has been awarded many times for being the best in the solar energy world. And we have now this proof from SP Borås that it has those performances. And we have made those installations all over the world. So we know how tricky it is and how to do it. And we have the future in front of us, where we know that the world needs to change from fossil fuel to solar energy. And we will not rest until we have our factories and the solar collectors in every country in the world. So.
Thank you so much. That was really, really inspiring how you took an idea and now you have the world as your market, basically. And of course, your goal of changing the future in a way that will be sustainable for future generations as well. So catch him later and ask him questions because we're going to move on. We have some speakers left. So thank you so much. Thank you.